You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
Welcome into another Three Mall Pod. You might recognize the guy on the screen if you watched the show a few months ago. Actually, we recorded with Jarrett Sutton back in late August before the Chiefs became Super Bowl champs. And at that time, I think Jarrett was getting ready to go down to Phoenix, actually, for the Chiefs-Cardinals. And look what happened with that a few months later. Chiefs are Super Bowl champs. But we're here to talk K-State basketball, third pod this week. It's an exciting time, obviously, to be a Kansas State basketball fan as the Wildcats won back-to-back games over top 20 opponents. Joe Lunardi last night put up on the screen on ESPN that K-State currently is projected as a 2 seed. As we talked about this week in the NCAA tournament bracket reveal, K-State was projected as a 3 seed as of last Saturday before they rattled off a couple of more quad 1 wins. So great time to be a K-State fan, and nobody better to bring on to talk K-State hoops than Jarrett Sutton, scout for the New Orleans Pelicans of the NBA. We had him on, like I said, earlier this year. And so, Jarrett, hey, man, we appreciate you jumping on to talk some K-State basketball.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's man, memory lane here. When I was on the pod originally, I having flashbacks to the Arizona trip, and it's full circle, and Chiefs are Super Bowl champs. But I think what's great is like it leads right into the close of this conference portion right before conference tournaments. And being in Kansas City, it's great to have all the local schools being, so competitive. You look at what Creighton's doing, even, getting back into the swing of things. And that makes it a lot of fun for me, just being here in KC and seeing all these teams and knowing how competitive these teams have been, especially with, first-year head coaches. And being in the environments, you can't beat college basketball environments, and there's none better than around this region, and it's what makes it fun this time of year. Of just, I know we're inching closer and closer, and everybody wants to talk about the NCAA tournament, but there's still so much to be ironed out in terms of the conference tournaments and seeding for the Big 12 tournament and all that good stuff. So really fun to be on the pod with you guys. You guys do a great job, so honored to be on.
Well, hey, I mean, talking about that, obviously it's a lot of fun. You're a former Missouri player, and obviously you were at the K-State game on Tuesday night against Baylor. It's just a lot of fun to see the atmosphere return to Mizzou Arena when I'm watching those games on TV and the fan base come back, and obviously the same at Kansas State. So, I mean, just to start things off before we start talking about the on-the-court success, you had a tweet I think Wednesday about you were sitting next to a scout at the game, and I quote, "Man, I didn't know it was like this," is what the scout had told you his first time to Manhattan. I mean, can you just describe, how you saw it through his eyes and what you took in from that atmosphere and what you saw in Manhattan on Tuesday?
Yeah, so I had to remind him that, I played in Bramlage, for 4 years when I was in the Big 12 and during the Frank Martin years with Jacob Pullen, and Magruder and those guys. I mean, it got loud, and it was loud the other night in the Baylor game. And first off, the student section's a blast, just seeing them rowdy again. I always have told people, it's been years since I was in, playing college ball, but I always appreciated the K-State student section. I always thought they were funny and like good humor, and like the smack talk was great. They it was always good stuff that was like, man, I can't believe like they found certain stuff like that from like middle school from some players and stuff like that. So I just always have appreciated going to Bramlage. But yeah, he's a GM of a G League team, so he works for a front office for an NBA team. But he gets out on the road right around this time of the year. He doesn't get a chance to go to a lot of college games, but he does go out towards the end of the regular season portion of conference play. And he had never been to Manhattan. So it was his first time. He's a younger guy. And he leaned over. He's like, man, I didn't know it was like this. And I said, this is the environment that's being built here from Coach Tang and his staff. And it's been, 1 year. And, to see where K-State's at and the consistency they played at all year, putting this roster together, the excitement of the fan base and just the style of play you get behind, and the coaches and are so engaging, and they're such likable guys, the entire staff, not just Coach Tang. And so I just it's fun for me, and it's an easy drive for me from KC. And I know it's been said a lot, like, a lot of times scouts fly in, and, Lawrence is not that far of a drive. But I always tell people Manhattan is such an incredible college town. My sister-in-law went there, and to me, I've been in that basketball facility and what they've done in terms of, making it an environment for basketball too. The football success speaks for itself. But, when I view K-State, I view it as a basketball school too, just like I would view Mizzou. I think football and basketball can both be successful. I don't think you have to pick one, and that's a great thing. So, yeah, it was a great conversation. You could tell he was in awe of the lights and, during the timeout and the student session going nuts. Like, a lot of these guys that are on the G League side or, in the NBA offices, they don't get to be around a lot of these college environments. So when they can get out and see it, they really love it and get behind it.
Yeah, I actually have only covered Kansas State since 2017. And before that, it was Ohio State and Iowa. And I think just about every Big 12 environment probably laps those two, which is probably says what the Big 12 has kind of turned into, and especially Ohio State, which is, they kind of killed their atmosphere when they moved into that new building. But in those, 6 seasons, there's probably been 8 of the top 10 environments have probably been this year. So that kind of shows you how Jerome Tang has quickly transformed it. The Baylor game on Tuesday night was really good, but it would probably be at the tail end of the top 5 this year. I mean, the Kansas game and the Florida game was actually sneaky, really raucous too. They really laid into the Gators for them being the SEC school. And of course, it was Keontae Johnson against this forward team, so it had a little bit more meaning behind it. As an NBA scout, what have you seen from Keontae Johnson, before the scare and after the scare, and how he may even be improved in terms of just his overall basketball talent, what he provides?
Yeah, well, he was great in the Baylor game. My gosh, he was so efficient. I think the thing with Keontae that I think is most interesting for me is just the fact of, he sat out almost 2 years with everything that took place. I remember seeing that situation when he collapsed and, thinking, man, I hope we can see this kid play basketball again. But first and foremost was his health and, being, safe from his own self. And, there when he was at Florida before he collapsed, he was a first round talent. And he was in the conversation for SEC Player of the Year. So everybody knew his talent level was just what Keontae Johnson are we going to get? And man, I mean, he just hit the ground running from the start. I think all year, Keontae just hasn't missed a beat. Every player that is in Keontae's role, Jalen Wilson has been this way. Kobe Brown has been this way at Mizzou. You look at the Arkansas squad, right? I mean, Anthony Black's gone through this. Ricky Council's gone through this. There's games that, that they'll struggle in. But if you look at Keontae's game log, there's not many games you'll find where he's not efficient. I always look at, the splits, right? Where Keontae's at, shooting the ball, 2-point field goal percentage, getting to the free throw line, rebounding the ball. A lot's made of defense. I do think he's gotten a little bit better defensively. I think that was a big area going into, what Kansas State could look at in terms of what they were going to get. But I just think the fact is what K-State got is the Keontae Johnson we saw at Florida. And to your point, I do think he's better. I really do. I think there's a level of toughness that Keontae's always had. He is a highly intelligent player. He is great without the ball. That's probably his best skill. I would say that his role at Kansas State is much different than what it was at Florida, where he's got to do a lot more than what was asked of him at Florida. And that's okay. Certain guys want that. I think sometimes Keontae can fall into a trap with that of just trying to maybe do too much. I know he's had some turnover games where he doesn't turn the ball over really from what I remember at Florida, and he's had some turnover games, but I think a lot of that stems from he wants to do more. He wants to make others better. He's trying to be a playmaker more. So I appreciate that about him. But I love how he's a soft-spoken guy, but I just looks that like he's so happy in Manhattan. Some of those wins, the Kansas win jumps out, but even some of the other games I've seen, with K-State, he just has a smile on his face. You can tell he's thrilled with the decision he made. And I mean, you're talking about going from Florida to Kansas, right? I mean, it's a huge jump for him. And he's just not missed a beat. And, you pull for guys like that. Keontae's everything that I got from Florida before he transferred was, he was just the heart and soul of that program in terms of the type of kid he was. And he's brought that to Kansas State. And this is where Jerome Tang deserves all the credit. I mean, yes, he's made others better. Marquise Noel has been terrific all year. I think, you look at Naquan Tomlin, he's coming along slowly, but still shows so many flashes. And, what a great get that was. I really think Coach Tang and his staff just identified the right pieces, and they knew they needed to have a guy that could come in, hit the ground running, and give them a jolt of production, of offense, being able to impact winning, and doing it not just with what the production is, but the leadership component of this. I think I've told you guys before, like Keontae in a practice, he's a grown man. He is that adult in the room. He's the guy that everybody looks up to, and that goes a long way, especially the experience Keontae has, the winner Keontae is, the competitor Keontae is. There's just so many things to like about this kid, and it's why he's, right back in the conversation for where he was just a few years back when we were talking about him in the draft. He hasn't really missed a beat, and that's a testament to the kid, the work ethic. He is a pro mentality, pro worker, and that's everything you want to find.
Yeah, I think the first game this year where he didn't score in double figures was only like a week or two ago.
Right.
So kind of shows where he's been at. You mentioned Naquan Tomlin. This year's kind of gone in waves for him, just as he kind of breaks through learning curve after learning curve. But in terms of where you're coming from and what you're looking for, he's kind of probably that next guy when it comes to the tools, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, you said the tools kind of jump out, right? I mean, 6'10" and long and late bloomer, a guy that I still think is just scratching the surface. And I think a big part of it is still not just learning the game, but the experience of playing in high level competition. There's guys you evaluate all the time that, not to take anything away from them, but they play, at smaller levels, or, they're growing up against different levels of competition, different environments. You're throwing Naquan Tomlin into the Big 12. That's a whole nother ball game. And, I think he's handled it pretty well. I think there's moments where he struggles. I also think he still has those flashes where you see it, where you think, man, that's what this kid can be. And obviously you want to find the consistency there. And, he's a spot shooter that I think that, once the confidence keeps coming and once his feel and comfort level and the strength and all those things start to hit, he'll be able to take a bigger jump. But, his ability to get to the rim, his length, his ability to play above the rim. But I think his best skill, to be honest with you, and I think it's what the staff identifies, his twitchability defensively is such a weapon. That helps so much in terms of game planning and guarding actions when you have a guy that can switch. And he can sit down, he can guard, he can move. He will have those mental breakdowns and lapses, but I love that he has a second and third effort. Like his motor is always going. He's going to make mistakes. He has made those mistakes, but there's been so many games where you're like, man, he really has a chance. We'll see how it continues to play out. But I think, what Coach Tang and his staff found and what they're continuing to develop, you continue to see that in little bits and pieces. It's tough when you're in league play because you have to press the right buttons as a coach. You have to find the right rotations. It's yes, you want a player like Naquan to get as much experience as you can, but what that roster is and the depth that Coach Tang has in the rotations, he's starting to play guys that really give them a lift in terms of winning games. So it's a back and forth conversation, I'm sure, but Naquan has got a high ceiling, and I do think he's just scratching the surface.
Well, I love everything you said there about Naquan, Jarrett. I'm excited to see him with another year in the strength and conditioning program with a full off season with strength and conditioning coach Phil Byer, get a little more muscle, a little more weight on, but the tool set is definitely there. The ability to handle the basketball. He's a 74% free throw shooter, so that tells me that he in all likelihood will be able to become a better, more consistent jump shooter from the outside. And if he could just get to 34, 35% from three, as you know, he can be quite the weapon as he adds a little more strength. And the defensive versatility, as you mentioned, his quickness, his athleticism, the ability to switch and guard 1 through 5 is just tremendous. And so the ceiling is through the roof for him. And Keontae, you talked about it, but I mean, I love, he's just such a good rebounder too. Like people think he's 6'5", 6'6", but he's second in the Big 12 play in rebounding. Great scorer, but at Florida, he was always a terrific rebounder too. He's not the biggest dude in the world, but he goes up and gets the ball. So,
another thing too with Keontae that I didn't mention is where the NBA is going in terms of physicality. Like the strength piece, I think a lot of teams are looking at that. right? They're looking at guys that can come in and handle the physicality and the contact and his strength. I mean, I think it was the bucket he had against Keontae George, who's a very talented freshman, where you could tell Keontae George thought, wait a second, I don't want that anymore, just Keontae Johnson going right through him for a bucket. That is impressive. And obviously, again, you're looking at Keontae Johnson in a specific role that I think he'll be able to flourish at the next level, where he's not going to be the 1 or 2 option, but he's going to be a piece where you think, man, he can come in and he's going to embrace everything you ask him to do. That to me is what's so intriguing about him, and just translating it. And is he a 3? Is he a 4? There's a lot of times he could play both, just because he rebounds and he moves guys with that strength, and just has a great knack for the ball.
Well, he's 41% from 3 now on the season too. He's become a little bit. I mean, it's not like he was a bad shooter at Florida by any means. The numbers were there, but he's shooting it a little bit more from the perimeter this year, which makes him a harder guard as well. And Jarrett, that play that with Keontae George, I'm just surprised with the way college basketball officiating is. They didn't just call a charge, even though he didn't even go down. I mean,
I said the same thing. I couldn't believe it.
It's like, it reminded me of the, you would know this because the Missouri play in Allen Fieldhouse against KU, when was it Ricky Paulding or who was it that got called for? You've seen that clip.
Keon
Dooling. That's right. Just the embodiment of what happens in that building. Anyways, I digress and move on from that. As DY knows, I could vent about that quite a bit. Hey, so
we all
yeah. Hey, so when we talked back in August, we were asking you, like, do you think this is an NCAA tournament team? And we talked about at the beginning of this pod. Right now, they're a 2 or a 3 seed in the projections. Just how blown away are you with the job that Jerome Tang and this staff has been able to accomplish in just year one?
Blown away, because I think that the Big 12 as a league as a whole that's been talked about so much, it's so good, and obviously Coach Tang knows all about that just with his days at Baylor. I think the thing that really jumps out, and you guys know this, I've said it before, is just in terms of recruiting, fan bases always want to go after the 5 stars, and they want to try to identify the best recruits out there, and that's every program wants, every fan base wants that, right? But with the portal being what it is, the NIL world we're in, and you're going to see this every year. Every offseason is a chance to improve your team, and you're 1 year away from making an NCAA tournament. I think every program has that now, and obviously, I still am a believer that certain guys shouldn't transfer just to run from their own problems. Sometimes it's okay to stay in school and develop and wait your turn when you're not ready. That's a part of it. But I think that the team that they put together, it's not just, Keontae and Naquan and Marquise. It's Cam, it's Desi, it's Nagesson, it's Ish. Those guys are playing a significant role on this team. And they probably, not to Kansas State fans, but I think nationally, I think they kind of fly under the radar of just their impact. And I think just it's the style of play that is impressive, but I just think the fact that this staff has been able to elevate guys and put them in the right positions to be successful. Like, you might disagree with him. I've seen Marquise Noel so many times in his career. It's the best I've seen him by far in terms of decisive decision. That's what it's all about. And the Baylor game speaks for itself. He didn't make shots, but it felt like he made so many plays to win that game and to get Kansas State the lead. He's just such a competitor, and he's gritty, and we've all known that, but it feels like Coach Tang and the staff, because the staff is tremendous. I think they have a great staff. They've elevated the play. They've elevated how they run offense, their defensive schemes. Yes, it helps when you add a Keontae Johnson talent and he hits, and he's been a home run in terms of the player they got in the portal. But it's not just him. It's really what they put together from a roster standpoint. The buy-in. You look at the videos of the locker room that the program puts out there. I think that's real. I've known Coach Tang a long time. There's nothing that's not genuine about Coach Tang. He's just an amazing man, and his energy speaks for itself. He's going to keep it real. He's going to tell it like it is. He's not afraid to be open and really share his thoughts and be honest. And I think every player wants that. They want a level of honesty. I think there's an engagement there and a buy-in with that entire roster, and you see it on the bench. You see the bench being involved in every game, no matter if you're playing 25 minutes or you're not playing at all. That to me is a sign of a program that's bought in. I think they played with a chip on their shoulder all year too, where they know they're good and they want to prove it every time out. That to me is again, this staff, what they're doing, what they're building. I love that when it's a loss, next game, it's put it behind you, learn from it, move on. They're instilling so many things from a cultural standpoint where I feel good about this for Kansas State. I don't believe this is just going to be a one-year thing. I think this is something that's going to be something where Coach Tang is showing he is a tremendous head coach. Obviously, it depends on, the recruits and the portal and everything from here moving forward. But I think we're learning right now what Coach Tang can do with the basketball team and with this staff and where they could be year in and year out competing in the Big 12 and ultimately competing for NCAA tournament, berths and wins and what have you in the postseason.
Yeah, I like what you said about the other guys. Obviously, this team goes as Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson go. That's where every team is with their stars, really. That's basketball. Right. But from start to finish this year, one of my favorite players to watch has been Desi Sills, just because I'm not sure there's a faster player with the ball in his hands in college basketball, because when he wants to go, he really takes off. But we talked a lot about what kind of goes right for Kansas State, but just an interesting question I'd like to pose to see where you would come from. They've had skids this year at times where it hasn't gone well for them. Can you pick out like a specific weakness or a couple of them or culprits of what happens when things don't go well for them?
Yeah, I would take I was at the Kansas game in Lawrence. Obviously, it's an emotional game in terms of rivalry game. K-State already got the first one, so there's some factors, right, playing a part there. I think sometimes stopping the bleeding is a bit, and most teams struggle with this sometimes, where when it rains, it pours, and when you're struggling to get a stop, or you're not making shots and you're not getting back in defensive transition, it just kind of snowballs. And it felt like in that game. Not that they didn't, not that they let go of the rope, but I just felt defensively, you didn't feel them really. I didn't feel a presence from them on defense, which typically you do. Not that they weren't in the game, but it just felt like, Kansas got hot, and then, all of a sudden it was, you just didn't feel K-State defensively, particularly in defensive transition. So not to say that that's a game by game issue, but, that's one area that sticks out is, to me, I feel like Marquise, I trust Marquise so much as a point guard in terms of his ability to make plays that I think offensively, I think K-State's going to be solid in terms of being able to score the ball. It's everything defensively of being consistent and getting stops when they need to get stops and obviously closing games out, winning games when you have to depend on your defense to get you through some tough times offensively. But every team would say that. Obviously depth production is going to be big. You mentioned Desi. I still think Cam Carter gives them good minutes. I know he can be a little streaky, but I think he provides a little bit of a relief when he can get some buckets, when he can score the ball. And you're not asking him to be a 20-point guy, but I just think it takes a little bit of the pressure off of Marquise and off of Keontae, most importantly, when they can get a little bit of a rest and know that the production offensively is going to go down and the defensive intensity isn't going to go down as well. But those are just kind of some areas. I just think Keontae too, in terms of like where he's at, in Big 12 nationally. I mean, the guy does so many things on the glass, and I thought what was good in the Baylor game, he didn't. I think he had one rebound, I think is what it was. That to me is another thing where it's, when you have a guy that hey, that guy can rebound, maybe he's just going to go get it. I think it's okay to have that mentality of, look, I need to be in the mix. I got to go get involved. I got to go get a rebound. I got to go be a secondary rim protector. I can't just depend on my teammate to do it just because he's good at it. There has to be other guys getting involved and doing some of those little things. That to me is when Kansas State is really good, when everybody's doing the little things and locked in, and the attention to detail really is what it comes back to.
And then I'd finish with a couple of just big picture questions real quick. You see a lot of SEC ball being a kind of a Mizzou guy. I guess I'm just interested because the Big 12 has really widened the gap between themselves and the rest of the college basketball. But SEC is probably the second best league, maybe the Big East. What's the gap? What's the difference between Big 12 and everybody else right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I was honestly like, when I looked at the Big Ten, when I know last weekend they kind of released, that first top 16, and the Big Ten's got quite a few teams in there. That I was a little bit surprised by that. I know the Big Ten's kind of come on strong. There's some teams there that have really played well. But when you look at the SEC, I think the gap would be, there's some middle of the pack teams, and Mizzou's in this conversation. Arkansas's in this conversation. Like A&M is in that top 4. Kentucky's playing better. There's some teams that, really have had ups and downs. It's been a little bit inconsistent in the middle tier of the SEC. Like Alabama's been so good. They've been the premier team in the league. It's why they are where they are. They're the most talented, obviously. They have the most depth, all those things. A&M has been probably one of the tougher teams. But if you look at the middle pack of the league, it's kind of a hodgepodge in terms of where everything's at. And there's still a lot to be decided in these 3 games, too. Like Mizzou could win their 3 winnable games. They could be in a double bye situation. So I think the SEC middle of the pack is just much different in terms of a lot of these teams jockeying for not only where they're going to finish in the SEC, but ultimately there's some teams that are in this play-in conversation, Mississippi State for one, that they still have a lot to prove, where the league could end up getting more teams in. But I agree with you. I think the SEC is probably, for me, the second best team behind the Big 12, which is why the Big 10 having as many teams, that was a little bit of a surprise for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then I guess in general, one more would be, is Alabama the best team you've seen this year across the board?
In terms of talent, in terms of, like, they have, like, Mark Sears getting Mark was being an older, proven scorer was a really good get. The freshmen speak for themselves. Jaden Bradley's healthy and adds a totally different dimension to their team because he's a great point guard, but he's got some combo guard stuff in him. They got Quinterly coming off the bench, and Quinterly was their starting point guard at one point. I mean, so the depth piece to them is really intriguing. And then Brandon Miller is that good. I know it's been a controversial topic in college basketball, but, his 41 last night, and he had 8 rebounds and, the 3 steals and 2 blocks. I mean, he impacts the game in so many ways, and he's just lethal off the dribble and can shoot any team out of a game. And then Noah Clowney, they're big. So I would say talent-wise, they are probably the best team. I saw them beat Arkansas in Fayetteville, and Arkansas kind of kept it close, but Alabama just can put the foot on the gas at any time. They do not have as many quad 1 wins, obviously, as Kansas. I think Houston is playing much better because Marcus Sasser has definitely turned a corner. So I would not sleep on Houston either. And Jarrett Walker has played really, really well of late. They don't have the depth of Alabama. So I think, yes, to your question, Alabama probably is the most talented team I've seen. But I still, in the NCAA tournament, that doesn't mean I think they're going to be a lock to go to a Final Four either, because we've seen before, and Alabama's been in this situation before, where sometimes you're the most talented, but you're really young. You don't get past some of those tough games. More times than not, those experienced teams, those tougher teams that have been in those moments and have won games and are kind of battle tested, those are the teams you probably want to put some stock in when you get into the NCAA tournament.
If you had a vote, Jarrett, who would be your national coach of the year as of today?
Man, that's tough. I mean, I know this might not be a popular opinion, but I do think it's Bill Self. I just to win a national championship and get those 2 guys back is one thing, but he doesn't have the same horses we're used to seeing Bill Self have, and the Big 12 is, in my opinion, the best league in college basketball, and they've kind of separated themselves a little bit. I know they're still in the lock with Texas, but Texas has more pieces. They have more depth. They have more natural talent and athleticism, and I just think the job that he's done. The way they beat TCU the other night, perfect example when Jalen Wilson doesn't play well and they go get a big win on the road, and it's a tough, gritty win where those are the types of games where I think that deserves part of it. But there are some coaches there that I think are part of the conversation, and Jerome Tang is for sure one. I don't want to write that off because I think he's right there in the conversation. We were talking about the best league in college basketball and a first-year head coach. I think Jerome Tang, if someone said, I think Jerome Tang should be coach of the year, I wouldn't, squawk at it. I think he's got very much the resume this year, and the job he's done is very much deserving.
Well, hey, we bring you on to talk K-State, but I gotta let you gloat a little bit about the Missouri hire and Dennis Gates too. I mean, look, you look at Missouri and K-State, they probably have 2 of the 3 best hires in college basketball from this offseason, next to, Sean Miller at Xavier. Obviously has worked out very well for them too. So just, what do you think of the job that Gates has done at Missouri?
Yeah, he's done a great job. I think when we put this team together, he had guys come from Cleveland State, he got a kid from Missouri State and Isaiah Mosley, who really hasn't really even played all that much and was a top target in the transfer portal. It's been up and down with him playing. To kind of a similar conversation of what Coach Tang has done with Marquise Noel and just the best I've seen Marquise. Dennis has done such a great job with Kobe Brown, who is shooting 45% from 3 and just taking his game to a whole other level. But I also just think it's just how he plays the game is so much different. He had 5 steals the other night in the Mississippi State game. Like defensively, his hands, like his body's in better shape. He plays with way more fire and energy and consistency. He's way more aggressive. Like there's just areas of what we're seeing from the development of some guys that have been really good. He added Demoy Hodge, who's one of the best 3-and-D guys in the SEC. And at one point, Demoy and Kobe were 1 and 2 in the SEC in offensive rating. So, I mean, he's getting the most out of his guys. I think the same thing, I would say this about Coach Tang too, like I say about Coach Gates. I think that's why both K-State and Missouri are so lucky to have these guys. I really think that there have been moments where watching K-State and watching Mizzou, ATOs, drawing up plays, adjustments at half, adjustment in game, late in game, throwing different defenses, throwing different coverages, all those things matter. And, both staffs have done a great job to do that and get the most out of their guys to win games. So that's why I think both, Dennis Gates is, going to probably be nominated to be coach of the year. I think he's behind some guys, but he's done such an amazing job. And I don't think it can be overstated losing Isaiah Mosley for much of the, he has played. He's not ineligible. He's not hurt. It's been a lot of things off the floor. But to have his team at 20 wins, he's the 3rd coach in program history to reach 20 wins in his first year. It's pretty impressive stuff, especially they've been so undersized. They've been dominated on the glass so many games, and they find ways to win. They're a top 10 offense in college basketball. So he deserves a ton of credit. He's an amazing man. He never breaks, who he is. He's very even-keeled, doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. He's as, calm as it gets. So I think that really bodes well for just him as a head coach. And another guy that has a great staff, CY, Charlton Young, we got from Florida State. Great recruiter, and I know Mizzou fans are pretty excited about the future.
And I love what you said about the ATOs. That's a great point. Like when I watch K-State, I can't count how many times they've come out of a timeout and had a play drawn up that works perfectly and executed perfectly. They're great at inbounds plays under the basket. It's so refreshing to see. In the past, K-State would just have to throw it out up top, be on the 3-point line or half court, and it feels like they get a bucket on 50+% of their inbound plays. So it's very refreshing. Hey, Jarrett, man, we appreciate it again. You're one of the best guests that we have on. Thank you so much for taking the time, jumping on with us and recording. I forgot to mention it earlier, but hey, stock up on your Ben Holiday Bottled and Bond Bourbon 360 Vodka. March Madness is coming right around the corner. So you're going to want to take some PTO off work, folks, and maybe grab a bottle and, stay away from the kids and family and just isolate, have a couple drinks, watch basketball. So, yeah, we appreciate their support, and we appreciate you, Jarrett, for jumping on. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who continue to listen to 3MAW. For Derek, for Jarrett, thanks again for listening to another 3MAW pod.
Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, the fastest growing sports media network in Kansas City. Check out these videos that feature our team of more than 15 former players, insiders, and analysts bringing you the best Chiefs coverage you can find. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.